This is gonna hurt me more than it'll hurt anyone else watching right now. This is Escape Room Play, though some call me Play from the ScapeROMFiles, and I have to unfortunately go into some serious talks. One regarding emulation, abandonware, and of course, everything else in between. This is a topic that is about on the gaming verse compared to something like abortion or religion, and I'm not quite frankly really sure why. But some people just prefer to play in the real thing. Some might think that even the very act of playing something that's not made for the system is considered stealing or theft. As someone who's dabbled with emulation since the days of Genesis and Nesticle, kind of showing my age, but fuck it. I'm gonna go over some of the bullshit that people love to spew and hopefully try to debunk some of this while giving my own 2 cents. But let me talk about the recent events that happened with Yuzu and Nintendo. So for those of you who may not know, I don't blame you if you haven't, but if you know, you probably already know, so feel free to skip ahead. There was a pretty big controversy with Nintendo Switch emulator developers Yuzu, with them basically locking content behind a Patreon, or Patreon, however you say it. And this unfortunately led Nintendo to basically filing a lawsuit, and of course Nintendo ended up winning, as the bottom line is that Yuzu was basically profiting off of a company who isn't exactly preservation friendly. Now, obviously, my thoughts on the whole ordeal is that while emulation itself is not the problem, distributing the things needed to make the emulators work is where the moral gray area comes into play. But mainly to do with the fact that Yuzu legit trying to make a profit off of it is kind of why RCPS3 got a bit of a legal matter with Atlas when they did the same thing with Persona 5. I'll just leave it at that. The obvious takeaway is that Nintendo is basically trying to be anti-gamer preservation, and that they're being a bunch of assholes, as they always are, whether it comes to fan-made games or emulators or anything of the sort. And whenever Nintendo strikes anything down, people will basically yell all the profanities at Nintendo, but then quietly forgive them when they announce something that tickles their inner nostalgia. Which is kind of funny, actually, since the exact same thing happened once again with Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. You know, the game that's so beloved. Yeah, it's getting a Switch HD remaster. Fuck you, Nintendo. Yeah, I guess they're gonna win you over now, right? Had Yuzu not tried to block content behind a Patreon, I don't think Nintendo would have necessarily cared as much, especially since Ryujinx is still a thing, and that Ryujinx is a lot more free compared to Yuzu, which is kind of like the whole PS2 versus Xbox ordeal. I know that might not make much sense, but let me put it this way. The PS2 had you buy an adapter to play online, and boom, there you go. Whereas the original Xbox had all the online ready to go, but you had to pay a subscription to use it. And unfortunately, the latter ended up winning. But in this case, it's basically someone trying to profit off of something that isn't theirs, and the less about actual fan-made games, whether they be safe for work or not safe for work, the better. Seriously. People think that AAA games are the only ones who milk the fuck out of the consumers. Don't even get me started on the indie scene. And bonus points for Nintendo also striking down the Citra emulator, which is the 3DS emulator, partly due to the fact that the people who worked on Yuzu also worked on Citra. Even though I don't recall the Citra emulator having features locked behind a paywall, but because the team who worked on Yuzu also worked on Citra, I guess they kind of want their comeuppance, and of course this is where people are basically saying that Nintendo is anti-preservation and all that bullshit. I don't think if the two were connected, I really don't think Nintendo would have given a shit, but like I said, I'm not a legal lawyer, I'm not that dude who makes those interesting lawyer videos or anything of the sort, but all I know is that anyone profiting off of others' work in the way that RCPS3 used to do with Persona, or of course Yuzu with Nintendo, is just a recipe for disaster, as I'd like to say. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about how I feel about emulation in general. Honestly, I don't give two goddamn flying fucks. Now, obviously, there is a gray area when it comes to emulating games that are sold on the market, but whenever I think of emulation, I like to think of a term that a lot of people on the PC gaming scene love to use, and it's called abandonware. To those who don't know, abandonware is basically a type of game that's not sold in any known capacity, and thus, you're not really stealing anything, so just go nuts or use your hard-earned money and spend it on a third-party seller or buy it secondhand, whatever. A lot of stores, mainly retro gaming stores, there are some that I do frequent sometimes, have older PC games made by now defunct companies, and of course buying them at the store doesn't exactly give the money to them, but to the stores running the place so that they can keep buying and selling copies. And some people really like to collect these or actually play them while keeping their morals in check. Now, unfortunately, just because something is old does not mean that's abandonware. Something like the original Doom and even Wolfenstein 3D is not exactly abandonware, as it is still very much purchasable on Steam and goodoldgames.com. Yes, they are old as sin, but that doesn't mean that they're abandoned. Even with the legality of Bethesda being bought up by Microsoft or whatever, that doesn't change the fact that any game that's sold on a digital marketplace or anything of the sort is not considered abandonware, and technically pirating them is a morally gray area, even if they are 30 years old. The same thing can be said for console games or anything of the sort. Emulating PlayStation 1 games that you cannot buy on Sony's storefront is possibly abandonware. Doing something like downloading a copy of Twisted Metal 1 and 2 that you don't own is a morally gray area, as that game is digitally available on the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5, albeit with no online play, but still. I'm actually surprised I even bothered to put that shit on there, but oh well. If you don't have a license to play the game, or technically having the original discs on you, you are technically stealing, but who's to stop you unless you use something like torrenting? Using torrents for something like PlayStation 1 games or anything of the sort that's older is honestly not worth the legal trouble, but I'll digress. Even recently, Nintendo, going back to them again, I know, they actually added Mother 3 to their Nintendo Switch online subscription service in Japan. As I said in that video of mine, I do not know why people want Nintendo to localize this one niche role-playing game that, if it were to be translated, would just be ruined, just like with Fire Emblem Engage, and just be completely butchered and ruin the whole mature themes that these games used to have. I hate to use the meme, but be thankful that Nintendo is even releasing their games on that service at all, even if it's not the right way to play them, but it is technically not considered abandonware until it becomes so again. Like with the Wii U, used to having a way to purchase Game Boy Advance games. The Switch lets you do that, but with the purchase part and having to have an online subscription to even play them at all. If you really want to play Mother 3 while having your morality in check, create a Japanese Nintendo Switch Online account and start playing. I know there's a fan translation, but people really get anal about not playing the games as intended, and even some people go so far as say as ROM hacks are illegal. Yes, some people actually think this, and I don't know if they think that anymore, but that is completely erroneous, but I'll digress. Let's also not even get to the fact that you can even emulate certain games on Android devices. Apple is not exactly gracious with such things, and not to toot my own horn or anything, but a lot of people like to play a bunch of stupid, shitty games on their mobile phone. I have a lot of fancy emulators, even if some are not exactly favorable, but in my personal opinion, my personal picks, of course, including but not limited to PPSSPP, the PlayStation Portable Emulator, EPSXE, which is useful because I can transfer files between the Windows and Android version. My old boy, Drastic, which runs a lot better than Desmond, and using Melon Boy for very specific things, mainly the trading and Rockman Operation Shooting Star, it's called. There's also RetroArch. I know I'm not calling it RetroArch, that sounds dumb. And for when I want to get really nostalgic, I can use the DOS emulator. Forget what it's called. If you want to play these games, they're technically not abandonware, then just fucking do it. If you really want to keep your moralities in check, just buy the game online provided the prices aren't insane, or just go to your local retro store and just buy the game that way. It is really stupid to see such discourse, let alone arguments, whether playing these games is stealing if there's nothing to steal. It's honestly retarded. Do I also need to remind you that even all three of these platforms, whether it be console or PC or even handhelds, have emulators built into some of these games? Like, let's look at some of the most notable examples of this shit. You have Super Mario 3D All-Stars. They're just emulated versions of the classic games, and even the whole Super Mario Sunshine Cubes thing is a perfect example of that. All these various ACA Neo Geo games, just repackaged emulators sold to you for a fair price. You have the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection on modern systems, just emulated from some version of MAME, and even saying the slowdown is nothing new in the world of multi-arcade machine emulation. Even the compilations that Sega did back in the day, they were just emulated versions of the classic Sonic games that people really liked. In one way or another, you probably have played these games, albeit emulated, whether it be through an unofficial way to play them on PC, or even soft-modding your original Xbox to do exactly that, or even playing them in a compilation disc that's just repackaged to be playable without having to download some shady software that people think is going to give you a Tostino's virus or some shit. Also, personally speaking, I have played quite a bit of these older games through emulation. Granted, I can't exactly tote having the original cartridges or games, but it doesn't change that people have played these classic games in one way or another. It doesn't make you any less of a fan simply because I played through them, unlike a certain modern-day video game, but I'll digress. And the fact that people want to go on about such things is honestly absurd. Like I said, it is technically a morally gray area if you are going to be pirating games that are sold on the Switch, but that's your department. In fact, just don't even talk about that, because it's just going to give you a bad rep. But if you want to for games that aren't even technically sold, and you don't want to waste your money, sure, waste your money. I don't mean to sound like a dickhead, but it is kind of a waste. Unless you really like the game so much you want to have a physical copy, then just do it. Just like the Nike commercial. I can't comprehend beyond this type of rant, so I'm just going to stop before I say something incredibly stupid. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I'm going to do something a little bit more productive, and I'm going to celebrate my Mario 10 day by not doing anything Mario related because I'm kind of sick of this homogenized shit. There are plenty of better games out there. I need to go expand my horizons. This is Escape Room Play. I will see you all next file. Thanks for watching, and take care.